Hey, welcome to this edition of Thrive. As always, I hope it finds you well, and I really do appreciate you giving me this opportunity to encourage you and hopefully inspire you as you seek to become all that you can be. You know, one of the things that has always shaped the way that I've sought to interact with people, especially when I've met people for the first time, is the way that Jesus called one of his disciples. In the Gospel of John, we read how Andrew, one of the first disciples, after he met Jesus, it says he went off and got his brother and brought him to him. And in the 42nd verse of that first chapter, we read how as Simon, and that's Andrew's brother, was coming near to Jesus, Jesus looked intently at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John, but I will call you Peter," which means rock. And it struck me early on in my faith that of all the things that Jesus could have said to Peter, what he did was he made this incredibly profound statement. He spoke to the unshaped, the undeveloped potential in a person that many would have already written off. He was a fisherman. He was, as we know from Scripture, he was impulsive. He was impetuous. He was a bit of a hothead. He just seemed to have a knack, as we read about him in the Gospels, of saying the wrong things at the wrong time, of misunderstanding, it seems like, so much of what Jesus had to say. I mean, it's like he slept through most of the lessons. And yet, Jesus' very first statements were not about how he was. He spoke to the potential that was within. And I've always found that really quite instructive, and it certainly caused me to think about how I interact with people. What do I see? Do I look at the superficial? Do I look at the immediate person in front of me? Or do I follow in Jesus' footsteps and step back and look intensely? Do I look beyond what is into what could be? You see, the fact that it says Jesus looked intently says to me that every time you and I meet people, every time you and I interact with people, we have a choice as to what we focus on. And we need to recognize that whatever we choose to focus on is actually going to determine the nature of that relationship. If you choose to focus on the superficial, if you choose to focus on that first impression, often what develops is negative. And that's going to shape the relationship. It's going to shape the way that we interact. It's going to shape our view of that person. It's going to shape how we see the potential of that person, and on it goes. Or we can take the example of Jesus and step back and look beyond that into the potential and let that shape the nature of the relationship, and let that begin to shape the way that we're going to build and walk with this person. And I've always found that to be the wiser thing to do. In fact, I want to suggest to you that the best gift that you could give to anybody is to look beyond the superficial, to look beyond the immediate words that are being spoken, and to look intensely and to begin to try and understand the heart, to understand the potential, to see what's locked up inside of that person. Because here's what I've come to appreciate about life. When I talk to people and I listen to their frustrations about life and everything that's happening around them and all those things, what I tend to find is that the source of those frustrations tend to be this awareness, even if they can't articulate it, that there's so much potential locked up inside of them, but they can't express it. They can't give voice to it, that they can't allow it to come out and to begin to live for itself, so to speak. And so it just creates this frustration. And that's why I say I think the biggest gift that you can give to anybody is to do for others what Jesus has done for you, which is to look beyond what is to what can be, to see the potential inside of the person in front of you and to speak to it, to call it out, so to speak. Because when you do that, you are helping that person begin to step out of stuck, if I can use that phrase, to step out of that sense of frustration because you are giving them keys to begin to unlock what is currently locked up inside of them. You see, one of the things that I find is really quite powerful is that Jesus recognized the potential in Peter. And he didn't just call it out, he then helped develop that. You know, I look at my life and I look at the lives of many people whom I admire and respect. And for the most part, what happens is this, that we're prepared to go so far for so long with people, but if they don't make the changes, if they're not willing to move beyond certain things, that we end up just pulling back a little and end up ultimately disengaging. And yet Jesus saw the potential in Peter. And yet, despite Peter's slowness to understand and his dullness, if I could use that term, despite his impetuousness and his emotional outbursts, so to speak, Jesus drew closer to him. Jesus opened his life up to him and shared his heart and his thoughts with him in very personal ways. And I think he did that because he understood that to unlock what was inside of people, you need to show them and let them see what potential lived can look like. Because isn't it true in your life, as it's been true in my life, that when we have an external reference point, it helps us then look at ourselves in a new light and begin to recognize the gap between who we are and where we want to be, or who we are and who we want to be, and begin to take steps to unlock it and to deal with it, because we have a picture, so to speak, in that person who's helping us through that process of what it can look like. And so I think that's one reason why Jesus drew even closer to Peter than perhaps he might have. And again, I say that I think it's an incredible gift that you and I can extend to others, is to recognize potential and then to help them unlock it so they can begin to live out of it. Because when you do, you begin to release the fullness of who they are, of who God's called them to be. You begin to do for them what God has done for you. And I think that as you do that, you help them find their voice and their life begins to change just as your life has been changed. And so I want to encourage you to think about how you interact with people, to step back and to learn to be more disciplined, to be more intentional when you meet people, when you interact with people, and to look beyond what is and to learn to discern what's locked up inside of them and speak to that and call that out and help develop it. Because here's what's going to happen. Two things are going to happen. The first is that you're going to set people alight that no one ever thought would be. You're going to set people alight who others had written off, who others had put in boxes, who others had already categorized as being also rans, as having no potential of whatever category they want to assign them, because they've judged them by the superficial, by the negative. But when you look inside and you see the potential and you speak to it and you help draw that out, what happens is you set a light in a positive way. And it just makes such a difference. And here's the second thing that will happen as a consequence of that. You're going to find that your influence increases. You see, influence is not about position. Influence is about relationship. And when you start to build those types of relationships that are based on drawing out the best in people, helping others become all that they can be, and seeing them set free, so to speak, what happens is your influence increases because they recognize that you've done for them what no one else has. And they see you in a different light and they talk about you and they give you mana, so to speak, which transfers to other people who give it to you as well, and your influence increases. And I think that as people after God, we should be seeking to have influence. Not influence in the way the world understands it, but relational influence that changes people, that sets people on a path of discovery of who God is and how to live in a right relationship with him, because it's only out of that they're truly going to And so I want to encourage you to look beyond what is to what can be. Learn to call that out. Learn to cultivate it in others as it's been cultivated in you. And as you do that, may you continue to let your heart leap with joy at the way that you find God using you to bring life to others. So that's my encouragements to you. I hope it's helpful. Until next time, God bless you.